Welcome inside Trailblazer Weekly. This is COVID-19 style, in quarantine, shelter in place, in the house, however you want to call it. Keric and Drayson Ball with you for Trailblazer Weekly, remote from each of our houses, and we are ready to rock and roll. This episode has been a couple of weeks in the making as we've tried to figure out exactly what this whole thing means for the show and for the campus here at Dixie State University and athletics in general, and we've got a lot to talk about. We haven't had a show since everything came down the news wire and everything's pretty much come to a screeching halt, but we are excited to bring you this episode of Trailblazer Weekly, where basically we're going to have a Trailblazer Weekly podcast, if you will. We're going to have a little bit of a roundtable and just recap the 2019-20 Dixie State athletics season and talk about our favorite moments of the year from each the fall, winter, and spring. And we'll also talk a little bit about, Drayson, what this whole thing means for the spring season, at least that we know to this point. We know that the NCAA has come out and said that those spring sports athletes will be able to have the year back should they choose. Obviously, that means a lot of different things for the seniors that are going to be graduating. Do they want to come back and get in school for an entire year? What's that going to mean? We'll try to break down a little bit of that in our final segment of the show. But first of all, it's good to see you. It's good to be back here on the show. It's been a couple of weeks in the making.
Good to see you too, Keric. Both of us practicing our best social distancing practices here in our homes. We wanted to do Trailblazer Weekly. Obviously, we missed the show, and once all the news kind of came down of sports being shut down and all the NCAA spring sports being shut down, we, like you mentioned, discussed about what the future of this show is, at least for the rest of this semester. And this is kind of the best solution that we could come up with, and kind of just in junction with many of the other sports shows you've seen around the country on SportsCenter and that kind of thing, to be able to do it from our homes. We felt like it was a no-brainer to try to continue to salvage as much as we could of this semester, and it's good to be able to do it again. It's good to see. It looks like we've both had the same type of idea as far as growing our facial hair out. We don't have to go into work. We don't have to really present ourselves, being here kind of social distancing ourselves. Looks like we've both taken up the growth of some facial hair.
Yeah, I've never been able to grow great facial hair. I'll admit that, readily and right off the bat. If we wanted to try to have a beard growing contest, you're going to win that, obviously. But I can grow a mean mustache, and it's a couple of weeks in the making here. And I figured it's my coping mechanism. There's no sports on TV unless I want to sit down and watch some classic games, which have been a lifesaver to this point, whether it's Utah Jazz Day on NBA TV or whether it's just going through and watching old Dixie State games on YouTube or on the Stretch Internet portal, But I told my wife that I'm going to keep this mustache until we have some sort of live sporting events back.
Whoa.
And that could be professional. I could mean Dixie State.
Okay.
So if we do end up having an NBA playoffs, finish to the NBA season, maybe the mustache will come off then. But I'm going to try my best. I think I'm going to try to keep it. So now I'm settling in. I kind of like it.
And make sure you take a lot of photos, because when you go through your old photo albums and you see 12 or 15 photos in 2 or 3 pages, you'll know that was when I grew that mustache out. That was during the big crisis there with the disease going around. So you'll be able to always remember this time when you had your mustache.
Well, and I've always tried to, whether it's been during spring break or the Christmas holiday break, just kind of grow one out a little bit. But then, they kind of give me a hard time in the office back there, about how it looks, and all in jest, obviously. But and I just haven't kept it during work. But like you said, we haven't had to go in, haven't had to do much of anything really except just work from home. So let the facial hair grow. Let's do this thing, So. Speaking of coping, you and I have made multiple, attempts at trying to get together and go golfing. And now the city of St. George has shut down the golf courses. That may not happen, but how are you coping with this whole thing? I'm sure binge watching Netflix and Amazon Prime Video. Are you doing all right? You have plenty of shows to keep you busy during the day?
I've had to dig deep into my fandom. I've obviously I've spent a lot of the shows on Netflix that I've previously watched. I've ran through those again as well. I've dug deep into Shark Tank, even some Judge Judy. Been watching a lot of Judge Judy at my house in the few weeks that we've been kind of quarantined in our home. So I had to dig deep into my fandom with no sports around, no Dixie State, no professional sports. It's been a little bit tough for me to adjust, but I have made it this far, I guess. So who
That's good.
knows?
That's good. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a big Psych fan. Obviously, there's nothing new. There's supposed to be a new movie coming out sometime this year. Haven't heard
Right.
anything on it yet, but and Psych occasionally will take a dig at a show called The Mentalist that was on CBS for a while. We never finished The Mentalist. We got about 4 or 5 seasons in, and so now we've been clearing out the rest of that show. And I don't know what we're gonna do after that. I guess maybe we'll have to sit back and watch some, show called Survivor or something.
Well, I mean, I've been trying to get you to watch Survivor for like 6 weeks or 7 weeks now since it started. It's the most recent season. So hey, if you want to be entertained and you want to enjoy the greatest show, the greatest reality show ever made, then you can turn on the CBS app and entertain yourselves with that.
Very nice, very nice. Well, this certainly helps having a show to produce and to do here on Trailblazer Weekly. It is indeed Trailblazer Weekly, first episode we've had in I think 3 weeks, if you count spring break and then the COVID-19 quarantine and we're rocking and rolling here on the show. Going to recap the 2019-20 season. Let's transition into that as we talk about how we've been spending our time and laugh and joke a little bit. In all seriousness, it's a very serious thing going on, not only just the United States but in the world right now as we try to figure out a way to flatten that curve, and that's why. Drayson's at his house. I'm at my house, and we're gonna do this show here. Let's talk about the fall sports season first. Obviously, we talked about a lot of this stuff during the show inside the Jennings Communication Building in our main studio. Talked about a lot of these moments, but there's a lot to talk about when you talk about the fall sports season. There was a graphic that we posted on our Dixie State Athletics social media earlier this year. Actually, we posted it just after the new year and talked about what a record-setting year it was for fall sports. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the highest, if not the highest, at least top 2 overall winning percentage of the fall semester. 69% winning percentage in the fall. I mean, that includes all of our sports that have a win-loss record in the fall season. And that was huge. It was a big year academically in the fall. 3.26 GPA in the fall, the highest that it's ever been in a single semester in Dixie State athletics. We had, Billy Hatch was an All-American in cross country. Women's soccer won the region title in soccer. First time that's ever happened in the soccer. And then, of course, football team going 8-3. And having the best year it's ever had. There's a lot to talk about when we talk about this fall season. So I'll just toss it over to you, Drayson, and say, where do you want to start when we talk about this fall sports season and what a semester it was for Dixie State athletics?
Yeah, I think we'll just start right with football. I mean, it's hard to not start with, the football team having one of the best seasons they've had so far and up to this point in the Division II era, and it's going to go down as the best season they ever did have in the Division II era, as now we're transitioning to Division I, and unfortunately we lost out on the spring sports. So essentially right now, Dixie State is a Division I program. And this final season for the football team is the best season they ever had in the Division II era. And it's tough to transition to say it out loud, to say this is the best season they've ever had up to this point. And now saying that was the best season they ever had and almost using it more as a past tense is kind of going to be tough to make that transition mentally for us, as we've been a Division II member for some time now. My highlight of the season, and this may sound a little bit weird that this is my highlight of the season. It was the Colorado School of Mines game as we traveled to Colorado. Dixie State football traveled to Colorado School of Mines on the road and played that game against Colorado School of Mines. And it was a loss. And you might say, how can a loss be the highlight of your season? And obviously, the 8-3 record is great and it's substantial and it's the most important thing of the football season that we saw last year. But I love the Colorado School of Mines game for a couple of reasons. First, you knew that the Orediggers had that game circled on their calendars since the end of last season, since Dixie State beat Colorado School of Mines in St. George, Utah. and they were the number 6 ranked team in the country. You knew that those juniors and sophomores, those underclassmen that would be playing in this game this year, would have that game circled on their calendars with revenge in their mind. And Dixie State went in there and almost beat them. And I say almost beat them. It was a 35-27 loss. And I'm gonna say that was the best game they played all season, including every single one of their wins. And I feel like they went on the road. They had a good game plan and they executed it nearly to perfection. And we talked about it on the pregame show, during the pregame show, and during the broadcast of that actual game, that they had to almost play perfectly, and they nearly did. They had 2 or 3 key mistakes in that game that could have swayed the momentum one way or the other in Dixie State's favor. And like I said, that was the best game they played all season. Unfortunately, they did make a few mistakes against a really, really good team who was ranked number 8 in the country at that time. And if you get a few of those bounces to go your way, you might have been able to beat that team twice as you're going out of Division II.
Yeah, it was a huge game, and obviously you made mention that we made the trip. Flight over to Denver that morning, zipping over to Golden, and then screeching into Marv K Stadium just in time for that game, and what a game it was. I mean, and they did have to play just about perfectly to win that game. And when I think about that game, I think about in terms of they won 6 in a row, and then they had a disappointing loss to Chadron State, and then a win over Colorado Mesa at home, which included the Sports Center top 10, the top play. And how do we not mention that? Cajun Smith McGregor
Right.
and JT Anderson was certainly one of the top 5 highlights of this 2019 football season, if not, the D2 era of Dixie State football. The only time Dixie State has had a play, it'd be the top play on Sports Center top 10. And we all remember that play. But the thing about that is Dixie State was trailing to Colorado Mesa the week before, and you could kind of see, at halftime into the third quarter, that there's a little carryover from that tough loss to Chadron State, and you just thought, I hope this doesn't snowball, into a loss against Colorado Mesa. And then they got to go to Mines, and then, of course, they have Adams State the final week of the season, which they were able to win 35-10. But the comeback win against Colorado Mesa and the momentum they built in the second half at home against Colorado Mesa carried over into that week of practice. It was a very, very good week of practice. And then into that Colorado School of Mines game that you mentioned, and they had a lead after giving up a pretty quick touchdown in that game to go down 7-0. They ripped off a couple of touchdowns and built a 10-point lead in that game. And it was back and forth, and they had chances to win that football game. And that's when you thought, okay, we're really seeing what this program is capable of doing. It was top 10, number 8 ranked team in Colorado School of Mines. And that's as close, as you're going to get, at least on Dixie State's schedule last year, in terms of what success will the Trailblazers be able to have going forward at the FCS level. You have to look at how they did against the best Division II teams on their schedule. A tough loss week 1 to CSU Pueblo that I think if you played that game later in the year, like this Colorado School of Mines game, I'm not saying they necessarily would have won the game, but it would have been a much closer, much different result than that week 1 result would have been.
First game of the season with a new head coach, just coming from a junior college now to a Division I program against an RMAC and a D2 powerhouse. I like what you said. If you play that game, the 7th or 8th game in the season might be a different result.
Yeah. And so you look at that Colorado School of Mines game, you look at everything they did. They had chances to win that football game, and that's all you can ask for in that situation. If you're Coach Peterson and his staff, no moral victories. They wanted the win. You're looking at, if you win that game or even the Chadron State game a couple of weeks before that, you're on the bubble and possibly making it to the playoffs that year. So there's things like that as you think back that sting a little bit, but it was a huge year. And one of the things for me, and we can talk about this Colorado School of Mines game a lot, but one of the big things for me was they had the tough loss to CSU Pueblo early in the year. And then, a tough first half. You made the trip with me to Durango, Colorado, on the Fort Lewis game as well the very next week. They were trailing at halftime and then had a huge second half and won 23-14. And then that snowballed into 3 consecutive wins on the road over Fort Lewis, New Mexico Highlands, and South Dakota Mines, which was not necessarily the cream of the crop of the RMAC at the end of the season. But I don't care who you are. If you go on the road and you win 3 games in a row on the road, I mean, in the RMAC, I mean, we're talking about some long, 2 long bus trips, and then the plane trip to South Dakota Mines that was a flight from Vegas to Denver, and then a bus ride up to Rapid City, which was 6+ hours on a bus still, and then you have to do it in reverse coming home. I mean, that was a heck of a 3-game win streak on the road, and for me, that's what set the tone for the success that they would have the rest of the year, to show that they could go out and they could win under any circumstance.
And yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it was fun for me and you to talk about before the season even started, and we were kind of throwing out some expectations, and we were talking about, maybe 8-3, maybe even 9-2, and we kind of talked about this is a realistic possibility coming off of a good season they had in 2018, 2019, and it was just fun to see them be able to go on the road and get a lot of key victories on the road. And I almost sometimes felt more comfortable with them being on the road than I did at home. And obviously they had very similar records, home and road. They did lose a game or two on their home field, but they were very good on the road and at home at times of the season. So it was really fun to be able to see them. I'll just throw out one more quick one before we transition into our next topic. Football versus Adams State. That was just a fun game. I was able to be there, and along with you, to kind of wrap up the final game of the Division II era, 35-10 victory to secure the 8-3 record. It was just a fun atmosphere to be there at that record-setting game.
Should mention football this last year, 10 all RMAC selections, a few on the first team, including a kicker in James Baird. The first kicker we've had at the first team all conference selection for quite some time. DeJuan Dantzler was on that first team, Chase Hess and Aaron Simpson. James Baird, Aaron Simpson, and Chase Hess all went on to earn all-region honors as well, which were the first all-region honors Dixie State has had since 2014. So some good things, and Trailblazers had the highest scoring offense that they've had in the Division II era, and that's an ode to Coach Peterson and his offensive mind and what he likes to do. Loved seeing the tight end more involved this year. It was, by committee, running backs. A.J. Luongo became the career rushing touchdowns leader. DeJuan Dantzler had another monster year at cementing, his legacy, in Dixie State football lore. And then the defense did a really good job this year as well. Record 40 sacks on the season. Dylan Hendrickson, single season record, 10 sacks. Aaron Simpson had 7 interceptions. Alex Lilliard had a great year. It just was a great year overall. A very good springboard year into Division I. And what better way to start off Division I than on September 5th, at least tentatively scheduled right now. We hope all this craziness doesn't go into the fall, but against SUU up in Cedar.
No doubt about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of fun to see. And as we transition into Division I, it's only going to get better from here, hopefully.
Let's move on and let's talk women's soccer. I mean, I think one could argue that maybe women's soccer was bigger than football even than necessarily, and that's a very fair, valid argument. But these are in really no order of importance. We just kind of went with what we wanted to go with, and let's talk women's soccer. A team that was very good. It's very high-powered offense, scoring team during the regular season. Went into the RMAC tournament and had a heartbreaking loss on PKs in the RMAC tournament. And this team wasn't even sure they were going to get in to the NCAA tournament. They did. And it was like sweet justice almost, getting the monkey off your back, that the way they advanced out of that very first game in the South Central Regional was winning over Texas Women's.
Yep.
And they won on PKs. And then that led into what was the biggest win. I'm just going to say it. The biggest win in program history in the D2 era, and beating UCCS, the number 1 ranked team, on its home field to advance to the South Central Region final. So much to say about this women's soccer team. I just kind of gave a brief overcap, but when you look at this women's soccer team, Drayson, where do we start? Where do we go first?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you mentioned, I'm going to just echo what you said. Hard to not put them in. I mean, if you were to rank, the best seasons of each team, and not we're going to do that, but hard to not put women's soccer over football, despite having the best record they've ever had in the Division II era. But women's soccer, it was so fun for me to be able to watch their run through the South Central region on their way to defeating the number one team in the country and the number 9 team in the country in that South Central Regional to become South Central Region champions. And like you mentioned, poetic justice, maybe, if you will, that they lost in the RMAC tournament 4-3 in penalty kicks, and then won by that same score in penalty kicks to Texas Women's in the first round of the South Central Regional. And I think that was almost, for the women on that team, almost like a, hey, we may have gotten the short end of the stick in the RMAC tournament, but we turned the tide, and now the tide is now in our favor, and we have the momentum. And that led in perfectly to defeating the number 1 team in the country in UC Colorado Springs on their home field by a score of 2-1. You got to remember, Colorado Springs was 19-0 to that point in the season. They lost the last game of the RMAC tournament to Colorado School of Mines, and then the very next game they played was against Dixie State, and they lost that one as well. So bizarre scenario with the number 1 team in the country being undefeated, and their final 2 games of the season, obviously heartbreaking for them, were both losses, and you didn't lose a single game in the regular season, and you lose back-to-back games, and you're all of a sudden your season's over. Obviously heartbreaking for Colorado Springs, but as a Dixie State fan, I'm obviously don't have any remorse or sympathy for them because it was so fun to watch this women's soccer team all season long. And we had a couple of the women's soccer players on a radio only show earlier in the season after they had kind of wrapped up their schedule there. It was fun to talk to them. And I remember one of the things that I asked them, I said, you got to be looking forward to going into Division I and doing the same thing you did in Division II. And both of them kind of perked up and smiled and said, we're so excited to go to Division I so that we can show them what we're made of. And that really was important for me to be able to say, these women are ready to do it, and it's going to be fun to see them go forward in Division I.
One of the big things for me too, and I had the great privilege to make that trip to Colorado Springs. I didn't make the trip the next week up to Bellingham, Washington, but I was able to go to Colorado Springs and I'll say survive, endure the win over Texas Women's, because it was freezing. I think I'm still thawing out from that. It's a good thing we're into the 70s here in St. George this week and go out and really get thawed out from, it just dumped snow the day before, and there was snow everywhere. They cleared the grounds crew at UCCS did a phenomenal job of getting that field ready to play and that facility ready. It's freezing cold on the sideline. And I mentioned that
was the game. That was the game. Don't forget, for those fans out there that may not remember, that was the game where they'd kick the ball out of bounds. It would go past the end line, or it would go out of bounds on the sidelines, and it would go up onto a big old snowbank. They'd have to go climb these snowbanks, get the ball off the snowbank, and then bring it down and put it back in play. I've never seen anything like that before, them walking up under these big snowbanks to retrieve a ball that had gone out of bounds.
Yeah. I mean, and they had, ball kids that were there that were supposed to be helping. In the second half of one of the games there, the ball kid was sitting there eating a bag of chips. And so he wasn't, on his A game there. And so they did. They're like 4-foot snowbank. I mean, maybe 3.5 feet. I'm 5'6", and they were up to my belly button. That's how high these snowbanks were that they had pushed to the side, and it was freezing cold. And I mentioned that because it's very relevant, because you had a Dell Brown, fantastic goalkeeper, started the game, played the entire match, and both extra sessions, and then it goes to penalty kicks. And then, freshman Michonne Estridge, who is from St. George, played at Dixie High School, she was kind of considered the penalty kick specialist at that point in time. And she comes off, and as I watched her, and the coaching staff kind of looked down, and they looked at her, kind of gave her a nod with about 2 minutes left in that Texas women's match, the second overtime period, saying, hey, get ready. If we go PKs, you're going in. And so she starts going through this routine that she has to get warm as good as you can out there. And it's in the teens. It's freezing cold. And she gets warmed up best she can, and she goes out there and she makes a couple of huge saves in the PKs. Comes off the bench cold and makes a couple of huge saves on the PKs to keep Dixie State in it. And then it was, you want to talk about poetic justice. It was one of the seniors being able to bury the final PK to win it, to clinch the victory. And just to see them sprint off the bench the way they did, what was incredible. And then the very next day, or a couple days later, sorry, it's soccer, you got to give that day in between. 2 days later, to experience the same euphoria and the same, celebration, except even to a greater extent, was just, I was speechless to be able to witness that, and knowing that they're going to go and now be able to play for a South Central Region title, which they won that title. It just was incredible to see them. And it was incredible to see they went into that UCCS game, because when they played there earlier in the season, they were very much the aggressor and were very close to winning the game earlier in the regular season. But at the start of that match, they were not backing down. They didn't care that UCCS was the number one team in the country. They came out, Whitley John scored a goal, right off the bat, and they stayed ahead. Basically, Dixie State was either ahead or it was tied the entire match. Trailblazers never really had to play from behind. And so they came out and they set the tone and made the number one team in the country kind of play to that. And it was just phenomenal to see. And I'll never forget seeing those student athletes that worked so hard be able to celebrate that victory on the number one team's field.
Yeah, one more quick thing to note about that game against UCCS. UCCS was preseason number 24, so they spent the entire year in the top 25 rankings. Dixie State never was ranked, ever was ranked in the entire season. They go on that run through the South Central Regional, and they finish number 8 in the final poll of the season. They finished number 8, having not been ranked at all throughout the whole season. Beat a team that was ranked in the top 25 for the whole year. Just phenomenal and really fun to watch.
And Cammie Hunter was the player who made the final PK in the Texas women's match. The name was slipping me there for a minute, and I had to get that. I had to mention that name because it was nice to be able to see one of those senior leaders be able to have that moment at the end of the match. And then of course they went on. They beat Dallas Baptist the next week in Bellingham. You get, at that point, you actually, you get to bring home a trophy after that. You're the South Central Region champions. Dixie State would finish the season, as you mentioned. They weren't ranked all year. They finished the season ranked number 8 in the country. And then talk about a springboard year going into next season. This women's soccer team, what a year it was. And I'm excited to see what they have in the future. Love it. Absolutely love it. Let's move on. We don't really have any time restraints today. No commercial breaks. No, so we're going a little longer than we wanted to here in this fall sports one. But there's a few more that we want to talk about here before things are over. I want to mention Billy Hatch in the year that she had, and both cross country programs in general. I shouldn't just single out Billy, because Kyler Miller on the men's side had a phenomenal year. Also, but Billy Hatch came out and just set record after record after record. The 5th place finish at the RMAC Championships, had a top 10 finish at the South Central Region Championships, and then a top 10 finish, I believe 8th overall in the NCAA Championships to garner All-American honors. The first top 10 finish at the National Championships in program history. What a year it was for her and for Justin Decker and this men's and women's cross country program. They both had their best NCAA regional finishes as a team. They set team records, they set individual records, and to see them have that success, for me, what was a huge part of that fall season success as well. So we got to give them a shout out. Kyler Miller came in on the men's side and just a freshman and shredded almost every single men's record. And, that they set their men's team record in the 8K as well. And just a huge year for this cross country program, and had to give them a shout out as well.
Yeah, I know. It was fun to see this program grow and really have successes with Kyler Miller and Billy Hatch, like you mentioned. 2 other quick sports I'll just quickly throw out before we transition into our winter sports. Volleyball, they had a really fun year. It was really fun to watch them in the Burns all season long. The game that sticks out for me is senior night against CSU Pueblo. They defeated them 3-1. I don't think I've ever seen the Burns quite as intense as it was on senior night for that volleyball team. It was a really fun atmosphere. It was loud and electric against a region rival or a division rival there at 3-1 victory. That was a really fun night for them as well. Plus women's golf, let's not forget them. They were a preseason number one favorite coming into this season in the RMAC. They were the name of the preseason number one. We were really excited about that at the time. And then obviously they won that first match of the season right out of the gate against at the CSU Pueblo Farmers Insurance Invitational. So really fun to see them. And unfortunately, obviously they were part of that. They have that kind of weird halfway schedule where they do half their meets or half their matches in the fall, and then they do the other half in the spring. Obviously, with the spring ones being canceled now, we don't know where they're going to end up. And so for them, obviously, it was kind of disappointing to see that their season would come to an end after being named the preseason number one, but a good season nonetheless, especially with a victory there.
Oh, incredible. And again, incredible fall season for all of our fall sports. And, we mentioned again, 69% was the overall winning percentage for all the fall teams that have wins and losses. American in Billy Hatch, women's soccer, South Central Region champions, number 8 in the country. And then they got it done in the classroom as well. I mean, all-time high GPA for a semester, 3.26. And for a football playing school, that's phenomenal, because you're looking at a football roster that has between 90 and 100 people on it. And if 10 of those guys don't get good grades, and that really can pull down the overall GPA. And so huge for this, the athletes and for fall sports. And talk about a springboard year. Now we've got Division I coming up. I'm excited to see, what happens in the fall with all of these programs. This is Trailblazer Weekly. I'm Keric Segmiller. He is Drayson Ball, just on the other side of your screen there. We're both at home, kind of doing our part to stay home and stay safe in this time of uncertainty, this time of, COVID-19, and, trying to do our part to flatten the curve. But too much success this year to not have this show. I don't know how many shows we'll do from this point on. We are planning a show kind of towards the end of the year when we can actually get back in the studio to kind of go back and look at some of our top moments of the Division II era, not just this season, but the Division II era. And we're looking at doing a show along those lines, but probably not until we get back into the studio. So that will be, in a few weeks, a month, who knows? We'll get that done over the summer, at least at some point, but we had to continue on with this show and recap this record-setting year for Trailblazer Athletics. Let's transition into the winter sports. And a lot of people are saying winter sports, well, it's just basketball, right? Well, no, you got women's swimming in there who had a phenomenal year as well. But I think when you think of those winter sports, you don't start anywhere else except for men's basketball. And the year that this Trailblazer team had, they finished with 23 wins, tying a single season win mark. They were going to have one more opportunity to set that single season win mark in Texas at the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, that opportunity came crashing down as this COVID-19, the coronavirus, kind of took over the sports world and the world in general, and everything was brought to a halt. Everything was shut down. I mean, this men's basketball team literally had just arrived in Texas when they heard the news that you're not playing. Now you got to stay the night in a hotel and then get back on a plane and fly home, the next morning. But what a year it was for the Trailblazers. And I think what makes this year even more sweet and the success even more phenomenal is that coming into this year, the 2019-20 season, there might have been more question marks than certainties because of a couple of key players not coming back and just wondering how quickly this team would mesh, how good will they really be? And then they answered a lot of those questions in the first 10 games with a 10-0 start.
No doubt. Yeah, exactly. And that was the funnest part for me, at least. And I think both me and you discussed in length and ad nauseum off the show and on the show about what is this team and where can it be at the end of the season. We came in, don't forget, you mentioned we came in with two of our key players that were not going to return, that were eligible, that were not seniors. They were underclassmen that were eligible to come back and play on this year's team, and for personal reasons decided not to do that. One of those players was your leading scorer from last year. And not only that, 5 of your top 6 scorers did not come back, either because of personal reasons or because of, they were seniors and they graduated. And the only player in that top 6 that returned was Jack Pagankoff. And I think you can summarize this entire season with 2 words. Those 2 words are Jack Pagankoff. I mean, it was a phenomenal year for Jack Pagankoff. We had the triple-double in one of the first games of the season against UT Tyler to start the year in a 100-91 victory. He won RMAC Player of the Year, and he secured his spot amongst the DSU basketball legends, in my opinion, this season with the way that he was able to carry this team and the season that he had. It was so fun to be able to watch him develop from the junior last season coming into this year, knowing that he is the leader on the team. It is, we go as Jack Pagankoff goes, and he really took that mantra and that leadership role and carried this team into the next level. And obviously they had key contributions from many others that really didn't have a whole lot of playing time last year, and certainly weren't huge key contributors to the team last year. But Jack Pagankoff and amongst others were able to bring this team and elevate it up to become one of the better teams in the country. And they were ranked in the top 25 for much of the season. And I think got up as high as 16, I believe was about as high, or 13 they may have got up to as high as that. And just really fun to watch their success, and unfortunately going to come to an end without having played that first round of the NCAA tournament, and certainly poised to be able to have made a run there, maybe won a couple of games in that tournament.
Yeah, and let's not forget, the 2019-20 RMAC regular season champions. You win that title. An unfortunate loss in the RMAC tournament to Colorado Mesa, which at the time we were all saying, hey, we get to go play in the NCAA tournament. It's okay. Now you want that RMAC tournament back, and you want to be able to try to finish that thing off. But, I like what you mentioned, and I think when you talk about this team, you start with Jack Pagankoff, the jack of all trades, your RMAC Player of the Year, first team All-Conference, first team All-South Central Region. What more can you say? And you think of some of the biggest moments this season, and Jack Pagankoff was behind him. You mentioned the triple-double. I remember the win at home during the regular season against Colorado Mesa when Dixie State needed some baskets, and Jack Pagankoff crossed his defender up. I think it was 3 times, and especially the exclamation point was a crossover step-back 3 from the right wing that he buried that kept Dixie State in front. And, his defender fell on the floor. Then the very next night, against Western Colorado, he did it again. Baseline right, a 15-foot jumper, crossed his defender over and he went to the floor and buried the jumper right in front of the Stampede student section. I mean, Jack Pagankoff delivered those moments all season long. And what a year it was for him. And we had him on the show twice during the year because he was a great point guard last year as a junior. And he was one of those guys that we knew he could be very good. We knew what he was capable of. I don't know if anybody thought he would be this good this year. And it was, first of all, credit to him for buying into head coach John Judkin's system and becoming, working hard off the court too, familiarizing himself with the system. That's year 2 versus year 1 under Coach Judkins and his system. But also a credit to Coach Judkins, because it was a 2-way street. It wasn't just a 1-way street where Coach Judkins was telling Jack how it was going to be. You saw as the season wore on that there would be times where whether teammates were shooting free throws or whether it was during a timeout, I mean, it was almost worth the price of admission itself to just watch the Dixie State sideline in the huddle and the interactions between Jack Pagankoff and head coach John Judkins, because it was a 2-way street. It was Coach Judkins, taking into consideration and then even implementing suggestions that Jack had. And that takes an awful lot of trust from a head coach. And that trust was there. And that's why the results happened the way they did out onto the floor. And we can talk about Jack Pagankoff for an entire show, probably, because of how good he was. he made everyone else around him better as well. And one of those players that really benefited from a point guard like Jack Pagankoff was Hunter Schofield, coming in from Salt Lake Community College, and he finishes as the team's leading scorer and tied with Jack Pagankoff for the leading rebounding mark. And you talk about players who and things that we didn't know what we were going to get out of that year. You talk about someone transitioning from the junior college ranks, and he came in and made a seamless transition. And it was marvelous to see the way that he transitioned from the junior college level to the Division II level and took games over himself. And he averaged, pushing 20 points a game and rebounded well and was really a beneficiary of Jack Pagankoff being able to distribute the way that he did. I thought Hunter Schofield had a phenomenal year, as well as a few others who I'm sure that we'll get to as well.
Yeah, Hunter Schofield led the team in scoring at 16.4 points per game. He shot 53.5% from the field and 35% from three. So he had a tremendous season in his first year with the Trailblazers. One quick note on Jack Pagankoff. It's going to be fun as we look back, on the Division II era for Dixie State basketball and what it was. Certainly there's going to be times where, me and you are going to look back and say, who had the best individual season? Not necessarily the best career. Obviously, the best career could go to guys like Trevor Hill or Brandon Simister, Money Mason Sawyer, Mark Ogden Jr. We could certainly give the best career to any one of those guys or debate amongst the other ones. But I'm not sure there's a whole lot of guys that you're going to be able to submit that had a better one individual season than Jack Pagankoff in his senior year. So a lot of fun to be able to watch him and join him on this journey as he was able to help the Trailblazers off to a great season.
And no arguments there. No arguments whatsoever. I want to give a shout out to a couple of seniors on that team as well, and then some of the underclassmen as well. Dayson Youngblood had a huge year going in, and he's actually a junior. So I'm getting ahead of myself there, but and I'm just looking at this season box. But he had a huge year, and it was one of those things where Coach Judkins had them on the floor, Jack Pagankoff and Dayson Youngblood together on the floor a lot. But it was one of those things where he almost couldn't afford to not have at least one of them on the floor. You look through everybody and the minutes that they averaged. Jack Pagankoff averaged 33.6 minutes per game, and then Dayson Youngblood was one of the next highest at 27, 28 minutes per game. And the things that he brought to the table were huge. Defense, offense, getting people involved. But I mentioned, I want to give those seniors a shout out. Andre Wilson, I thought was someone who deserves maybe one of the biggest shout outs of all, because as a junior, he started alongside Jack Pagankoff. And now here come guys, like Dayson Youngblood playing his way into the starting lineup. Guys like Frank Stain, a freshman, coming in and taking a lot of minutes. But then here is Andre Wilson coming in, and he averages, on the season, 6.7 points per game. But there were moments, and I've been watching through a lot of these games from this year, just in quarantine mode here. What else do you do? Andre Wilson hit, I think you could argue, some of the biggest shots of the season off of the bench. And Dixie State is not where it's at the end of the season without Andre Wilson, and a senior who was able to buy into the system and buy into what his coaches were telling him and still made his mark off the bench. So, and that the same can be said for Cameron Chatwin, who wanted to start every game as well. And, and he did not, but Cameron was huge on this squad as well. And I believe those are the three seniors on the team this year, in Jack, Andre, and Cameron Chatwin. But without those three seniors, it's not the season that it was for this men's basketball team. And there's so many players that, we could sit and talk about them all, but I think you kind of just lump them together as a whole and you say, what a year it was for this men's basketball team. And I've been saying all year long, and I don't know if Coach Judkins would agree with me or not, maybe in his mind, he doesn't place one team above another or one, but for me, the job that he did with this group of guys this year, which saying this at the end of the year and seeing how talented everybody was on the team, it doesn't seem like much, but when you were going into it, there just were a lot of question marks, like we've said. So for me, this is one of the best coaching jobs that Coach Judkins has had in his career, because of having to deal with replacing your leading scorer, having to deal with replacing one of your main hustle guys, and then you win the conference. You're the number 3 seed in the region tournament going in, and what a year it was. So congratulations to Coach Judkins and his staff and all the players who did a phenomenal job this year. And I'm excited to see, where this goes now in Division I for this men's basketball program. You saw, programs like California Baptist, programs like Grand Canyon University that transitioned from the same conference as Dixie State, that came in and did not take a super long time for them to enjoy some success at that Division I level and in the WAC. So I don't think we're that far out from Dixie State men's basketball really making some noise once again.
No doubt about it, and I'm excited to see what they do in Division I. And I've thought for a long time since I was at school here at Dixie State several years ago. I've always thought, man, Coach Judkins is so good. One of these times he's going to be plucked away by a Division I school, and Dixie State's going to not be able to keep him because they're Division II. And now they're going into Division I, and I think this is right where Coach Judkins deserves to be as a Division I coach. And I think it's going to be so much success for Dixie State basketball in the near future as we transition into Division I. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely. Let's roll on in winter sports and stay on the basketball court and talk some women's basketball, because you can't talk basketball without mentioning both programs. It's been a long time since you saw both men's and women's basketball teams in the conference tournament at the end of the season. And this women's basketball team, they finished 18-12 overall. And there are 2 or 3 different games, and Coach Gustin would agree with this, that you can go back and you can circle and say, and you always want to say too, when you're looking back, you want to say no excuses and kind of live that mantra. But you can go back and there's a few games that this women's basketball team should have won. This Dixie State women's basketball team should have won 20 games this year, which is a benchmark for a lot of programs. They say if we can get to 20 wins on the season as a basketball program, then we're in good shape. And this women's basketball program was right there. And head coach J.D. Gustin has done one heck of a job at helping this program get better. They've improved by at least 3 wins in each season of his tenure, including a 7-win jump from his first season to his second season. But this program has improved each and every year. And you saw a very fun product in this women's basketball team out on the floor this year. They win a game in the RMAC tournament. They go to the number 2 seeds court and beat Western Colorado 65-60 on the road in a game that you and I were both at the Burns Arena during the men's game that night. And I'm telling you, I'm on the call of the men's game that night, and it's getting close to halftime. And pretty soon I'm wanting to say, hey, Mike, take over here, because I sound like an idiot because I can't multitask to save my life. Right. And I'm so distracted because I'm watching the women's game on my phone while I'm trying to pay attention to the men's game that's happening on the floor out in front of me. And what a night that was. What a year for this women's basketball program. And, we can talk about a lot of different players, and we'll get there. When you think about this women's basketball season, where does it all start for you in terms of, the fantastic year that they had?
Oh, a whole lot of fun for the women's basketball season. I remember during that game, that game at halftime of that men's basketball game, I was up in the stands. I was a fan for that game. I wasn't involved with the broadcast or any sort of the game production in any way. I was actually up in the stands just as a fan for that game. I was there with my wife during halftime of that men's basketball game. I came down onto the floor there with you guys in the press box, or I guess on the press row, I guess you could call it, or whatever. Yeah. And the scores table, and we were there with Steve and you and some of our interns and 4, 5, 6 other guys were crowded around this little phone, and we're watching the women's basketball game in Western Colorado on a little iPhone there, and it was just really fun to have that moment there as they won that game on the road at Western Colorado. But yeah, tremendous amount of fun for this women's basketball team, and you mentioned it, and I'll just echo what you said about Coach J.D. Gustin. Heck of a career he's already put up at Dixie State in the 4 seasons that he's been at the helm. I'm just going to go back quickly. I mean, this is the best season that they've had since 2012, 2013, when they were 12-6 in that year. That's in their conference record, 12-6. Obviously, it's their best, their first winning season since 2012, 2013. I'm just going to go through the last 7 years or so, list their records, and you'll be able to see the improvement that they've had over the 4 years that Coach J.D. Gustin has been the head coach. They were 14-14 overall in 2013. They were 8-18 in 2014 and 15, 9-17 the next year. They were 5-21 the year Coach Gustin took over in 16 and 17. He then improved that, like you mentioned, by 7 games. They were 12-15 in 2017-18. They were 15-11 in 2018-19. And then this season, obviously, they finished at 18-12, their best mark since 2012, 2013. So it was really fun to be able to watch them mesh and to see that if you hire the right coach and the players buy into the system, you can see an incremental, increase in wins, and a total of 13 wins over 4 seasons year over year has just been sensational and phenomenal. And now hopefully you can project that as you go into Division I and say, all right, we have a 4-year sample size. We have a 4-year window. We're not going to be eligible for the postseason for 4 years. So let's see what we can do in year 1 of Division I up into year 4 of Division I, and then go into year 5, now eligible for the postseason, and say, hey, you never know what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you went through and read those records, because I was going to do the same thing. And I'll just piggyback on that and add to that in the fact that Dixie State won 18 games this year, and that's tied for the second most wins in a single season in the entire Division II era. They had the 1 year that the women's basketball program went to the NCAA tournament was 2010, 2011. They won 24 games that year. The next year they went 18-8. They won 18 games that year, and then it was, as the program kind of spiraled down into some tumultuous years, they got down as low as 5 wins, like you mentioned, but now back up to 18 wins, the second most wins they've ever had in a single season. And a lot of that, it's Coach Gustin, and it's getting the right players in there too that want to buy in to Coach Gustin's system and work together. There've been a few that have come and gone, and and that's okay. That's their prerogative. But the team that they had this year was the team that absolutely needed to be at Dixie State this year. And I don't think you need to look any further when you're talking about players who have really helped this program. You don't need to look any further than Allie Franks, 4-year senior. I want to be careful how I word this, because I worded it incorrectly on the show earlier in the year. There have been players who have played for Coach Gustin to this point before Allie that were 4-year seniors that came through and graduated. But Allie Franks is the first 4-year senior who was recruited by Coach Gustin and his staff, came and played and stayed all 4 years. So she's the first one that has done that. And to be able to see, what she's done over those 4 years, her freshman year, they won 5 games. And she's been very much a part of the improvement. And to be able to see her and just talking to her, during the week and in between games, and you could just tell that this year that she was having the most fun that she'd ever had. And obviously a couple of those years she played with her twin sister, Kylie. And so, nothing compares to playing with a twin sister, a sibling of any kind. But this year they had the most fun just because they were winning. And they went to the RMAC tournament. They're in a position, if you win 2 more games, you go, to the NCAA tournament. But, just to mention her career stats, she's just the 4th member of the 1,000-point club for Dixie State. She finishes her career with 1,161 career points. Number 2 on the all-time scoring list. And, there's a couple games where she scored just in single digits this year. If she would have had a few more games this year, you never know. She could have got up there to number 1. But she was huge this year. And for those 4 years, she's been phenomenal for this Trailblazer team. Another player that really stepped up this year, a senior, was Maddie Loftus. We knew how good of a shooter she was as a junior last year, but this year she came in and she was much more consistent with that 3-point shot. And there were games on the road, I think of the Shadron State game when she scored 31 points, a career high on the road. Without her, they don't win that game. They don't have the year that they had. So there was a number of players that stepped up at different times. Kesley Stephenson as a junior had a huge year. How do we not mention London Pavlica, who was just a sophomore this year, and who you and I have talked, off the air, even on the shows. I think she grows into the Jack Pagankoff of this women's program, because she does all the same things that Jack does on the men's side, she gets people involved. She scores. She's a flashy player. She makes those highlight reel types of plays. And it was fun to see her continue to grow as a player as just a sophomore. She has 2 more years here at Dixie State. And it's going to be fun to see what she's like as a senior. So many players. And again, like we did on the men's side, and we're not mentioning them all, but we could and probably should, because they all had moments and games that they impacted and really helped during this season.
Yeah, and I'll be the first one to say, and I'll be the first one to admit, London Pavlia is my favorite student athlete in Dixie State history in the 4 or 5 years that I've been here at the school and associated with the athletic program. She's my favorite student athlete in any sport since I've been here at Dixie State. She is so fun to watch, and I'm so glad that she's only a sophomore. She's got 2 more seasons left at Dixie State that I'll be able to watch her. I love her game. Going back quickly to Maddie Loftus as well, you mentioned her junior year, she was almost known as more of just a straight three-point shooter. She didn't do a whole lot of other things other than shooting threes and kind of having plays run for her to come off a screen to get an open three. And we saw a new dimension of her game her senior season that we really, at least I hadn't really seen the previous year, where she was able to have the ball in her hands and create a shot for herself, whether that be a three-pointer or whether that be getting to the basket or creating a play for someone else. She operated more with the ball in her hands, something that we didn't really see from her in previous seasons. I love that she added that element to her game. Kesley Stephenson struggled early on, but really came on in the second half of the season to help the team reach the successes that they did. It was a fun year, and they're poised, like I said, and we can say this for a lot of teams in Dixie State, they're poised for a good start to the Division I era.
Yeah, they've already won some recruiting battles and things that they're going to help them get even better and better. I should mention the other senior, other 2 seniors that we honored on senior night. Chesney Stevens came and just had 1 year at Dixie State, but her impact was tremendous for this Dixie State team. Top 5 in scoring and rebounding, and was huge for this team. I also should mention Deshka Olsen, who, because of some injuries and things, this was going to be her final year of eligibility, final year of playing, and unfortunately did get hurt and wasn't able to finish the season. But she had a couple of games, the Black Hill State game and the Colorado School of Mines game, where she got hot and hit 4 3-point shots in both of those games. And without those 3-point shots, Dixie State doesn't win those games. And so fantastic year for her. It was great to finally see her after a lot of adversity, see her get to be out on the floor and make a huge impact in almost every game that she played in. And there's a lot of players up and down this roster that you can look at and say, had a great impact. And just like all the other teams, just excited to see what is in store for this women's basketball program going forward. That'll do it for basketball. Should mention women's swimming. Women's swimming had a fantastic year this year, and as you go down and look, I think it was this is taking a minute to load on my end. I think it was third at the RMAC championships. It was fun to see this women's swimming team get the Human Performance Center and have their own home here on campus. I talked to Coach McAllister a number of times, and she said it's just so nice for those swimmers to know that they don't have to rush out of class, drive over to the Washington City Community Center twice a day for practice, that they have a home right here on campus. They got to host some home meets, and with those home meets was born a very fun tradition that during the break you saw an all athletics relay race with each of the athletic teams and even administration building their own team. I mean, some fun traditions growing there, and you got to see Dixie State compete at home against a very tough Northern Arizona team that will be competing against Dixie State in the WAC. And Dixie State really held its own. We're really not that far off from having success. And for the first time ever, Dixie State wrapped up the year with having not just 1, but 2 student athletes qualify for the NCAA Division II championships, which were canceled right in the middle of those events. So what a huge year for women's swimming. And I don't know how much more can you say about Coach McAllister and the job that she's done with this team since taking over a couple of seasons ago, and seeing where they've gotten to. And just this program's still in its infancy, and I think you're going to see it's not far off. This is going to be one of the most successful programs in Dixie State athletics.
Yeah, no, they're one of the more teams to be excited about, because they were in just a couple of years that they've even had the program, 2-3 seasons, they were able to just really explode and make themselves known in Division II as a swing program. And so going into Division I for them, it's going to be really fun to be able to see how they grow and how they're going to be able to use the Human Performance Center to their advantage, because there's not a whole lot of teams that have anything like that, and certainly not a whole lot of Division I teams that have any sort of facilities as nice as that Human Performance Center. Obviously, there are a few, but probably not as many as you would think that have as awesome as facilities as those Human Performance Center. And that's going to really help in recruiting for those swimming teams. And it's going to be really fun to watch them in Division I.
This is Trailblazer Weekly. And like we mentioned earlier, we're both at home doing our part to stay home and stay safe and try to flatten this curve so that we can get back to the studio and do some more shows from home. And, obviously the spring seasons have been canceled. There's no chance of any sports happening in Dixie State's campus the rest of the year, but we can certainly talk about what a great year it has been, or it was, and we'll continue to do so. We've talked about fall, we've talked about winter now, and now it's time to transition into talking about the spring sports season. I think one of the seasons that, when you're sitting there talking about the year, is one of the more intriguing seasons of the year, simply because you run into all those what ifs, what could have happened, and obviously canceled in the middle of the year. And I don't think there's a bigger what if than the baseball team. And we'll just start right off the bat. Scott Van Pelt of ESPN has been doing a really awesome thing during his show each night. He's been doing hashtag senior night. And this Dixie State men's, the baseball team has, 13 seniors on this team, and a team that was 15-3 and nationally ranked and right where you wanted to be when this season was canceled. And so, like I said, there's no bigger what if than this season. But Scott Van Pelt featured this program on his senior night feature a couple of nights ago on SportsCenter, and it was fun to see him give this program respect on a national level that it certainly deserves. You talk about, really feeling for a group of guys and a coaching staff that they were not able to finish this season. I mean, it's got to be this baseball team. I know how badly, Coach Phaetonhauer in this program, that they wanted to not only win the RMAC, but they wanted to get out of the regional and make it to the College World Series this year and make some noise, in which they had every possibility to be able to do that this year. And, you just, as a sports fan in general, I mean, I'm taking myself out of the equation as an employee at Dixie State University. As a sports fan in general, you feel slighted because you didn't get to see Dixie State, even just in the RMAC. You didn't get to see them play MSU Denver, who's having a great year, Colorado School of Mines, who's always pretty good. And then we didn't get to see the season-ending series that would have been in St. George this year between Dixie State and Colorado Mesa.
Yeah,
which very well could have decided the RMAC regular season and going into the RMAC tournament. You just feel slighted as a sports fan, don't you?
I understand. Yeah, I have a stomach ache even to this day, knowing that we're not going to see Dixie State and Colorado Mesa. They were on a collision course. Dixie State and Colorado Mesa. Mesa was 14-4. Dixie State was 15-3. They were very similar records. We know about the rivalry they've had, especially in baseball. Really, baseball is where they kind of started this rivalry. It evolved over into basketball and football, into those other sports as Dixie State became a full member of the RMAC. But the Dixie State rivalry with Colorado Mesa was established really before any other rivalries in the RMAC were, and they were on a collision course to the end of the season, and it was going to be epic. You know me very well. You know I'm a huge baseball fan. Baseball is my passion. I had tickets to the opening day games, the Braves at Arizona on opening day on March 26th. Obviously, those got canceled. I'm still upset about that. But that just goes to show I'm a huge baseball fan, and I was so excited. Once Dixie State got off to a great start, I was so excited for them to be able to play Colorado Mesa on their home field at the end of the season to basically, essentially, predictions would say that would determine the winner of the RMAC. And I am so sad that we don't get to see that series, because it would have been an epic one. You mentioned the mention that Dixie State baseball got on SportsCenter by Scott Van Pelt. He mentioned Jake Engle and his 20 game hitting streak that dated back to last season, which right now is up in the air, and we really don't know. And maybe this is a good way to transition, at least for baseball side, of what is going to happen with these seniors that have been granted eligibility for next year to be able to come back and play their senior season. Again, what's going to happen with some of these guys like Jake Engle that, they've planned to have been graduated this year, but they got kind of a year taken away from them as far as, the athlete side of the student athlete portion. What's going to happen with Jake Engle? What's going to happen with these guys? And obviously we're not going to speculate any sort of names, but it just creates an interesting dynamic knowing that, for Jake Engle, you've got an ongoing hitting streak going into next season, which you weren't going to have eligibility for next year. Do you come back to try to extend that already program record 20-game hitting streak? Do you have other plans, after graduation that you want to get on with your life? It's just going to create an interesting dynamic for these seniors that have been granted an extra year of eligibility. Not to mention the underclassmen like a Tyson Fisher, who is trying to get drafted by a Major League Baseball team. He's now got an extra year of eligibility, right? I mean, so it's going to be so interesting to see how this all plays out.
I think the one positive note on all that is at least it's not a unique situation to Dixie State baseball and its players. I think you've got players across the country that you look at players at the high school level that maybe haven't committed yet, and they're going, how do I get recruited? You're looking at maybe a sophomore at a junior college program saying, how do I get recruited and how do I sign somewhere? And then you're looking at, players like, Jake Engle, Tyson Fisher, and then a lot of other guys up and down this roster on the baseball team that's saying, do I have enough work done now at the college level to get drafted somewhere? You mentioned Tyson Fisher's name, and he was a top 30 prospect this year going into this season. And we talked about that earlier in the show. Jake Engle was tearing it up. And just for those of you that don't know the numbers, I mean, Jake Engle's hitting 458. He's hitting 21 straight now, is it?
Right.
I believe games dating back to last season.
It's an ongoing streak. It's
an ongoing streak.
It is ongoing. If he plays another game, he's going into that game with a 21-game hitting streak, whether he comes back for next season or not.
Yeah, so he's hitting 458 right now. He's got 27 hits, 6 doubles, 6 home runs, 26 RBIs. He's slugging .864 right now with an on-base percentage of .568. I mean, that's RMAC Player of the Year numbers.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
You can keep that up, and that's when you just say, as a baseball fan and as a sports fan in general, you just feel slighted, because, man, like, seriously, we can't finish this year, and I get it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying put them out and let's play right now. That's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, I get it. We all need to do our part to help with this thing, and one way to do that is to not play these games. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention pitching right now too, because Dixie State as a team was 2.69 ERA. Had won obviously 15 games this season, was holding opponent batters to 228 average. I mean, this pitching staff was getting the job done as well. So it's not just offensively, and that's why you feel about this baseball team. It was an overall program. I mean, it wasn't just, okay, we're mashing the ball, but we can't get out of an inning to save our lives. It was an all-around team. That's why you just felt there's something special about this year's team, especially with that many seniors. And so, like you said, that does beg the question, who will come back? Like I said, we're not going to speculate who's going to come back or not, because that's an individual decision. And if someone doesn't decide to come back, it's okay, because you got to understand that these student athletes, I mean, they're going in, they're majoring in things, and maybe some of them are still going to go play professional baseball somewhere. But, for a spring sport athlete especially, I mean, you're talking about another entire year of school that you have to commit to. And with the move to Division I, I mean, you're not just talking about entire year of school, but you have to be successful. You have to have a good GPA, because if you don't, it will really hurt Dixie State athletics as a whole. And so, there's a lot of things that go into the question. It's not just as simple as, hey, should I come back and play or should I not? And there may be some coaches who have to make some tough decisions as well across the country, because you just don't know, because each of these coaches, it's great that the extra year of eligibility has been granted. And I think, honestly, it's the right thing to do. But then you got to remember that all these teams have recruiting classes coming in too, that, these freshmen that are going to be coming in expecting to be able to get innings and get minutes and whatever sport they're playing, that they're going to have, I don't envy being a college coach right now one bit, because it's going to be a lot of things, or a compliance officer or an academic success advisor. And I can think of a few people on our campus right now that's really going to have an effect on. And I don't envy those positions at all, because they're working around the clock to make this thing work in a very fluid and what seems is changing almost daily basis. They're working around the clock to make sure that they're working for the student athlete success, but the coaches' success and the team success. And man, it's we're glad to be able to have these student athletes back, but there's going to be some that probably choose not to come back, and you know what, if they do, that's okay.
Yeah, no, I don't envy being any one of these, the officials or the coaches involved with having to sort out this kind of can of worms that has become a result as this of this virus spreading. Obviously, you mentioned the coaches. It's going to affect the coaches. It's going to affect the players, the seniors, whether they decide to come back. It's going to affect the freshmen that are been recruited, that are coming in. You mentioned the financial officers, the compliance officers. It's going to affect the financial department as far as giving out scholarships. There's only so many scholarship dollars to go around. Do you give those scholarship dollars to a senior that comes back, or do you give it to the number one freshman that's coming into your team? I mean, how are you going to make those decisions? Do you take it away from some and give it to others? It's going to be an impossible decision to say, hey, we've got a 4-star, a 5-star, 3-star freshman coming into our team that we want to be here for 4 years. We don't want to take away his scholarship and give it to a senior that we're only going to have for 1. But at the same time, how do you not say the senior's been here for 4 years? We got to, he had his senior season ripped out of his hands. How do we not give the money to him? So it's going to be so hard to make all those decisions that go into the financial side of it, and also the athletic side of it, that, is the games that are going to be played on the field. And, do 4 seniors come back next year? Do 10 seniors come back next year? How does that affect your roster and the kids that you've already recruited? And, for me, obviously, it's each individual's decision, whether, they may have plans, they may have jobs already lined up, they may have decisions to go into the pros, they may have other things in their lives that are already planned, and they were saying, hey, I'm going to be playing baseball at Dixie State as a senior until June 1st, and then I'm going to be moving to here to do my job or doing this. And those plans just aren't going to go away because you didn't play your senior season. So it's going to be interesting to see who and how many come back, and if at all, and maybe hopefully we can have a lot of the seniors come back if they choose to do so, and we can kind of run this thing back and say, this was the team we had last year, and we got a large portion of that team back next year as our first year of Division I, and see what happens.
Yeah, and a lot of the questions that you asked are the things that compliance and eligibility coordinators around the country are trying to figure out, and working with the NCAA and just trying to decide, like, hey, what money do we have? What resources do we have? And, it's all very fluid situation right now. And like you mentioned, we don't want to speculate on any of it, who's coming back or, amount of money they're going to have, but that we just pose those things as, and, so things that have to be considered when making these decisions. So it'll be interesting to see, what plays out, what comes into play, what situations these teams have in the future. And obviously that's just one team of our spring sports. We can talk about our softball team as well. This Trailblazer team, and what a start they had, including winning around 10 games in a row at one point, and then got into RMAC play and kind of a little bit of a roller coaster through the first little bit of RMAC play. But if one thing's for certain, it's that any Coach Simpkins-led Dixie State softball team has had a knack for finding its way into the NCAA regionals. And you saw that last year where they had to win the RMAC tournament to get in to the NCAA regionals, and they did it. They won 3 games on a Saturday in Grand Junction, including 2 games over Colorado Mesa on the Mavericks home field. So never at any point are you thinking, wow, this Dixie State softball team might not make it to the regional, because you just know 11 consecutive trips to the regional. Every year that Dixie State softball was eligible for postseason play in the Division II era, the Trailblazers were there. And it just was an incredible feat. And, it was fun to see, the pitching staff growing the way it was this year, but then you throw in a freshman that was doing it all for this team in terms of hitting, playing very well in the field, and that was Hannah Eubanks. I mean, all the freshmen on this team this year were really playing an intricate role and a very crucial role in their success. But Hannah Eubanks was on fire. I mean, we're talking about Jake Engle type numbers for this softball team, and that's a year that you're going, man, that's not fair. I want to see that year finish. I want to see where she finishes, at the end of the year. I want to see where seniors like Corey Gahn and Brenna Cornwall and Riley Tedeca and those players, where do they finish? We don't know which of those players will decide to come back. Just like baseball, it's the same discussion, and you just feel cheated. Coach Simpkins was in line to get career win number 500 this year. Now that won't happen until at least next year. Just a lot of things on this softball program that you look at and you go, it's just not fair. And unfortunately, that's just how life happens sometimes. And I don't think any of us would have ever thought that there was anything that could stop an entire season of sports. And yet here we are and trying to, find our way through it. But, softball, just like baseball, was in a pretty good spot. And we're trying to figure a few things out, but I don't have any doubt in my mind that they would have figured them out. And now we don't get to see, just like on the baseball side, we don't get to see the softball team host Colorado Mesa. We don't get to see them play Colorado School of Mines. We don't get to see what could have happened in, an RMAC tournament situation and possibly going into the postseason. So, tough stuff there, but, a lot to be said for the softball team too.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I love what you said about Hannah Eubanks. And she was the leading candidate in my eyes for RMAC Player of the Year. Now, I've got a few stats here. Do you have both your hands handy, Keric? I want to see if we can use both your hands here. Just count. This is the stats that Hannah Eubanks, as a freshman, were leading the team in. A freshman leading the team. These are the amount of stats. She led the team in batting average, slugging percentage, on-base percentage, runs, hits by a long way, doubles, triples, homers, total bases. She was double the next highest in total bases, walks, on-base percentage, and it was one off being the RBI leader. As a freshman, Keric, she led the entire team in everything other than RBIs, which she was one off from the lead.
And what class was the RBI leader? It's a freshman.
Exactly. Laura Lockhart. And so for Hannah Eubanks to have this season cut short is so unfair. And obviously it's for good reasons, but it's so unfair and so saddening, at least for me as a fan. And I'm sure for her as the player in that season, it has to be just tremendously sad and disheartening, along with the other freshmen that were playing tremendously well. Hannah Eubanks, Laura Lockhart, Shay Clemens, Kaylin Walker, Ashton Bowerly on the mound for Dixie State. It's just too bad to see these tremendous freshmen that were able to come in and make an immediate impact for a team that, like you mentioned, has never missed out on the postseason at Dixie State in the Division II era. They've been there every single season. This has been one of the powerhouses, or perennial powerhouses in the RMAC and in Division II as far as postseason play goes. And you have a handful, almost half a dozen freshmen come in and make significant impacts to a team that was already pretty good from last year, coming in with some good pitchers in Kimberly Hazel and Carissa Burgess that played well throughout the season last year as well. And this year they were obviously off to a pretty good start. And so just to have this season cut short, really, really sad for the players involved. And hopefully, at least, we have a lot of freshmen that we can rely on going into next season to be able to look forward to. And again, they have their eligibility extended 1 year as well. So now they have half of a season, more or less, under their belts in Division II. And now they can go in Division I as if they were, freshmen coming in, but they're not going to have that learning curve going from high school to college, just because they've already had kind of maybe half of a season in Division II. So really tough to see that season come to an end, but really fun to see what they did so far, or what they were able to do at that point of the season.
Yeah, and I think you could say, this team was in the NCAA tournament so much that I think you could say the only thing that could keep Dixie State softball out of the NCAA tournament was a pandemic.
Right.
So, I mean, that's, you know, a tip of the hat to Coach Simpkins and his program and his staff. They have, you know, great things going on in that Dixie State softball program. I'm excited to see what they have going forward. Let's wrap this up. Let's just mention a couple other spring sports teams, because you want to, you know, look at teams, and maybe this is just what we're looking at in terms of these other spring sports teams. Teams that we feel slighted that we didn't get to see the rest of it. And let me first of all, disclaimer, it's all of them, not one more than the other. We're sad that we didn't get to see all of them. But I look at a women's track program, and that like the women's swimming team is very, very young. It's in its infancy still. It's in its fourth year, really in its second year as a full track and field team, and really just in its first year of actually having assistant coaches working with each individual group of throwers, sprinters, distance, hurdlers, you name it. You know, there's an assistant coach working with each of those groups. Well, they came out and they raced, and it's a good thing they did, because they wouldn't have got any meets under their belt. They had a meet February 22nd, which was the earliest that you could go as a Division II program, because indoor track and field was finishing up. That was down at the Rossi Relays, hosted by Claremont Mud Scripts in Claremont, California. That was February 22nd. And then after that, their next meet wasn't scheduled until March 21st. It wouldn't have happened. But you saw them come out and set 8 school records. Billy Hatch was one of those in some distance runs. And then you had a whole bunch of freshmen set records. And I'll just name a few of them: Abby Monson, Brenna Southwick, J.C. Smith, Kennedy Peck, Rachel Myers, Emmy Levitt. I mean, just tons of freshmen that came in and set records. And then you had a junior and a Weber State transfer in Starley Woodbury that came into the program, and she set 3 school records on her own. And so you're looking at this women's track team that would have competed to make some noise at the RMAC championships. And then you're looking at a runner like Billy Hatch in the 5K and the 10K that had a very realistic opportunity to win an individual national championship. Let me say that again. A very real shot at winning an individual national championship in either the 5K or the 10K, based on looking at her accomplishments in cross country and how many of those runners also run the distance events in track and field as well. And she had a very real opportunity to do that, and now we don't get to see it. And now she graduates and actually moves on from Dixie State. So we've seen the last of Billy Hatch in a Dixie State uniform, and just disappointing that you didn't get to see the end of that year for this women's track team.
Yeah, no, they were poised, and we've said this a lot of times, and we've almost been like a broken record, saying that these teams were poised to do good. And it's not that we're being hyperbolic. It's because that's the truth. That's really what it was. And throughout the entire season of 2019, 2020, in every sport, I don't think that I can recall one that I felt disappointed in, because they all performed and were able to be very successful in their own individual seasons. And I think it's because they had a lot to play for as the final season in the RMAC, and women's track and field was no different. And it was really tough to see their season come to an end after a lot of promise. And obviously Billy Hatch, who is probably the best runner in Dixie State's program history, maybe even Dixie State's all-time history, not even just Division II. She might be up there amongst the greats all time at Dixie State. And for her to not have an opportunity to finish out her senior season in track is really, really sad to see for a Dixie State legend.
Yeah. You mentioned women's golf during the fall. We don't get to see them finish their season out. Another program that's been an anchor and been an every year type of program in the NCAA tournament, it's men's golf. And the Trailblazers got, I believe, one competition in the spring, and they took second, and two. They got 2 in. Took 9th in a field out of a bunch of other Division I programs, and then the next week were in the running to win in Belmont, California. Took second, and that was right before everything shut down. But you don't get to see them finish. Women's tennis came out, and after kind of an up and down fall has won all 3 of its matches in the spring and was going to do some fantastic things. You get to see them finish. You get to see women's golf finish. And it just, disappointed to say the least. And like I said, we sound like a broken record, but, things happen in life, and, you don't get to that point in an athletic career without going through some adversity anyway. I fully expect to see all these programs bounce back and have that be an even bigger motivator going into Division I to say, man, we're ticked off that we didn't get to finish our spring season, and we're going to let that fester, and we're going to let that propel us into even more success our first year Division I.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And now, maybe the good news about this is, if there is some good news, and I'm just trying to find the silver lining in kind of a depressing situation, is we're now at a Division I program. I mean, we don't necessarily have to wait until all the seasons are over now to kind of say and feel and know and understand what it means to be a Division I program. We can say it now because, for all intents and purposes, all the seasons are over. And so we're now Division I, and we can now act as if we're a Division I program. And it's at least something to look forward to as we officially make the transition on July 1st later this year. But we can at least anticipate it and plan and prepare and think about that at least a few weeks before that we would have normally without the cancellation of the seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at in terms of Dixie State's next games are as a Division I member, and that change, the quote unquote change transition, doesn't officially take place or take effect, I believe, June 1st or maybe into July. But for all intents and purposes, like you said, the next games Dixie State will play are against Division I opponents or as a Division I member. So here we go, onward and upward. Man, what a year it was, and we didn't even get to finish it, but what a year it was. And for the spring sports, it's what it could have been. But onward and upward, looking forward to Division I. This has been Trailblazer Weekly, remote from Keric Segmiller's house, Drayson Ball's house. And like we mentioned, we're hoping to be able to get back into the studio whenever we can to put together a show about not only just the greatest moments of this year, but the greatest moments of the entire NCAA Division II era, because there have been a lot of them, and we want to we want to break those down. And don't worry, we won't do that without getting some fan interaction and letting viewers and fans of Trailblazer Athletics be able to have some say in those moments. So be sure to be on the lookout for those. Drayson, any more final thoughts before we wrap this thing up? It's been fun. I mean, it doesn't compare to being in the studio, but I've been able to at least kill over an hour of my day here, and what better way to do that than talking about Dixie State athletics. But any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up officially?
Yeah, no, good to get back on the show. Obviously, we're about 90 minutes right now, so we're getting an extra dose for those few weeks that we've been off. It's been fun to get back on the microphone in our own separate houses, and be able to just talk a little bit about it. Going back to that show that you've kind of teased a little bit, we're going to try as much as we can. We're going to try to do shows as often as we can with the limited content that we do have. That show is for sure going to happen, whether or not we get back into the studio or not. That's our goal. We want to do that show in the studio, but if for some reason the virus does not go away as they anticipate and we can't get back into the studio, we'll do it here. But that show is going to happen one way or the other, and it's not just the best moments. It's more specifically the best games in Dixie State's Division II era. We're going to be counting those down in sort of a fun style. And so we're looking forward to that. It's going to be good. It's going to be fun. And make sure you keep tuned to our social media channels at DSU Blazer Weekly on Twitter, Trailblazer Weekly on Facebook and on Instagram as well. We'll try to be posting there as much as we can and getting some fan involvement with that those top games of the Division II era, as well as putting out this show and further updates on whether or not we're going to have a next show. So just keep tuned to those social media channels, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. This has been Trailblazer Weekly. He's Drayson Ball. I am Keric Segmiller. Stay tuned. We'll let you know when our next episode will be. There'll be at least one more, like we've said, but we'll keep you updated and up to date on all of the situation. Hope everyone is staying safe and is staying healthy, and let's all do our part to stay home, stay safe. Let's flatten this curve so we can get back to sports and life as We know it. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you next time on Trailblazer Weekly.